and welcome to Cover Story. India has been watching the events unfolding in Sri Lanka with a great deal of concern and some alarm. After all, it helps to have a peaceful neighborhood, and we are doing our best to ensure that this stays so. Joining me for a conversation in this is Lieutenant General Amarjit Singh Kalkut. He is the former IPKF chief who, if there is one person who understands the people and the politics of Sri Lanka, it is him. So, welcome to this conversation, General Kalkut. It's a topic that you're an expert on, and you went into Sri Lanka in '87 after to keep the peace accord. But now, once again, seeing the events unfolding in Sri Lanka, there are some people. I think Dr. Subramanian Swamy is one of them, who has said that the army should go back in again. What is your first reaction to this?
My first reaction is no, however, with the proviso.
Explain.
And the proviso is the possibility of a China-Pakistan nexus building up in Sri Lanka. As you are aware that already China has been involved in Sri Lanka. The Colombo city port is run by a Chinese corporation, and we are aware of the China-Pak nexus. Therefore, in those circumstances, we are concerned.
However, why did you say no?
The reason I said no, we have to go back to the origins of this India's involvement in Sri Lanka. We have to go back to 1987 when India's Prime Minister then, Rajiv Gandhi, was under a cloud because of the Bofors scandal, and he, in order to deflect the situation or deflect that controversy, was looking around for some other issue, and he saw Sri Lanka where the Tamils were protesting and demonstrating on being politically discriminated as a kind of a low-hanging fruit which he could grab. And he used India's superior military capability to force Sri Lankan President Jayawardene to sign the India-Sri Lanka Accord in 1987. The accord implied, if you look at this map, it implied that the northern province and the eastern province of Sri Lanka should be merged as one to enable the Tamils to have a majority in this province.
So, I see in your chart it says Tamils are just 11% and the Sinhalese are in a majority, 75%.
Absolutely.
So, you are giving the minority Tamils majority political power.
Absolutely,
right?
In the northeastern province by merging them. But if you also observe from the demographics, that is 1/3 of the total area of Sri Lanka. Whereas the Tamils only constituted 11% of the population. Now, incidentally, this is also the most fertile area of Sri Lanka.
The north and the east.
North and the east. And therefore, you are giving, under the accord, the minority Tamils 1/3 of the total area of Sri Lanka, which is the most fertile area.
Got it.
This would not have been and would never be accepted by the vast 75% Sinhala majority. Therefore, I feel that the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord was flawed from the very beginning.
It hadn't been thought of that, there was no political follow-up, there was no, between the MEA and the defense also there was no tandem, one didn't know what the other was doing. I think RNAW was doing its own agenda. All that is true, but how do you link it to the present? Why should the army not go in today? Because you are again enforcing unpopular decision.
See, at the moment, what is happening in Sri Lanka is a political and economic upheaval. And the people are wanting a change in their political dispensation, as a matter of fact, a regime change. Now, a political dispensation can be given to the citizens of a country only by its own government and not by an outside power. Therefore, what has to happen is that the Sri Lankan government has to give the dispensation. The other alternative would be a regime change, which will involve use of military force by India, which I do not recommend.
So you're saying don't repeat the mistakes of 87
Yes.
by enforcing unpopular decision by military strength.
Yes,
That's
Yes.
that's where you're coming from.
right.
Okay, now, General Kalkar, what's happened is Ranil Wickremesinghe has become the Prime Minister. I know he's someone that you have interacted with personally also. Do you see him as a, people are saying that he's the best bet of the Rajapaksas, he's going to do their bidding, or is he the right choice?
We go back a little back in history. The present dispensation there, the Rajapaksas, belong to the SLFP, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, Rajapaksa was a protege of Sri Mavo Bandaranaike. He was a lawyer. She brought him up to the center. And the Rajapaksa brothers, from there onwards, prospered. Because Rajapaksa, before that, was in the military and was accused of having accumulated money, wealth, by using his power. And later on, as you're aware, that the Rajapaksas got hold of the government in Sri Lanka, and with him he brought his brother Mahinda Rajapaksa and the third brother Basil Rajapaksa. So one became the president, the other the prime minister, and the third one, Basil was made the defense minister, but after the LTTE was finished, on that victory ride, he became the finance minister. So they were controlling everything, mismanaging the economy, lot of nepotism, lot of corruption, and they personally, obviously, have amassed huge wealth.
How did they come back to power? They were voted back with a huge majority. So obviously the Sinhalese population, the majority population voted them back. What is their vote base?
Yes, the vote base then was having defeated the LTTE.
So that was a populist.
That's right. Okay. Riding on that popularity, they got a huge majority. And as I mentioned, Basil was the defense Secretary of Defense Minister earlier, then he was made the Finance Minister. So now the Rajapaksa family was firmly entrenched with the President, the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. And in this position, they have looted the Sri Lankan government, Sri Lanka and the people.
But there's an elephant in the room.
Yes, there is. Now, as you're aware that Sri Lanka debt is almost $51 billion. They have no foreign exchange. They cannot import anything. They cannot pay for anything, not even basic survival medicines. And there's a huge flare-up in the civil population in Sri Lanka. And the unrest is now beyond control by the Sri Lankan government of Rajapaksa.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, the latest reports indicate that he has fled to Trincomalee on the east coast, probably for an easy getaway by sea or maybe by air. Both cases.
Some want India to give him sanctuary.
I do not think so, because India has already welcomed the Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe as the Prime and welcomed his appointment. Therefore, I do not think that India will be happy or willing to give a sanctuary to Rajapakse,
Okay.
Gotabaya
Mahinda.
Mahinda Rajapakse. But however, uh, this is a very clever move by the Rajapaksas,
Why?
because you see, Ranil Wickremesinghe is known to be an honest person, an efficient person, and well liked. So to take the heat off, they brought him in as the Prime Minister, and hoping that it would restore the peace or tranquility amongst the
People.
people of Sri Lanka. However, there is an elephant in the room, and that is that Sri Lanka has a presidential system of government. The president can appoint or dismiss any prime minister whenever he wants to. Therefore, the jury is still out on what happens in Sri Lanka.
In the beginning, you had said that the proviso was that we are pushing Sri Lanka towards China.
Yes.
China already controls, I think, one of the ports.
Yes. I'll explain that. Because of their misgovernance, Sri Lanka was in debt. Misgovernance by the Rajapaksas. So China offered them a loan, which they could not service.
Right.
They took the loan. So in lieu, they gave them, through a Chinese corporation, the total rights of the Colombo port city. And with that, China has got itself embedded in a certain part of Sri Lanka, right in our backyard. Now, that is not in our interest at all.
Okay.
And with the China-Pakistan nexus, it is even more alarming.
That's what I wanted to talk to you about. China is already there with Sri Lanka.
Yes.
They are also building this Belt and Sea route
Yes.
where India is not a part of.
Yes.
So, how should India then position itself? Because we are definitely not in good terms with Pakistan. We are not even on good terms with Nepal these days.
See, we have to deal with the government of Sri Lanka and not directly with the people of Sri Lanka, which we cannot do. With Ranil Wickremesinghe as the Prime Minister, India should do everything possible to assist Ranil Wickremesinghe to succeed. However, because of this elephant in the room, the jury is still out on what's going to happen next.
There is talk of them wanting to change the constitution also
Yes.
and remove the executive presidency.
Yes, if that comes about, then there is a lot of hope for Sri Lanka and also to the advantage of India. Because one thing is certain, that Gotabaya cannot carry on as the president with the kind of a hue and cry which is happening in Sri Lanka by the common man. They have nothing to eat, they don't have medicines, they have nothing available at all, no petrol, no oil. And therefore, let this resolve by itself, by the laws of nature, that the people of Sri Lanka will ultimately get Gotabaya out. There's already a hue and cry for Gotabaya go.
Right.
Gotabaya go. And in our own way, we have our external clandestine agencies. We should help indirectly without being directly involved.
Okay. That's a very loaded statement, but it makes a lot of sense. I'm going to take a break, but I'm going to come back and talk to you also about India's place in the neighborhood. And also, looking back at the peacekeeping force as to how it's been handled politically also. That's something I want to talk to you about, but after a quick break. Hello and welcome back to Cover Story. We are in conversation with Lieutenant General A.S. Kalkar, the former IPKF chief. We are of course talking to him about Sri Lanka, and the question of the day is whether we should send the army in or not. He of course says no, but with a proviso. He's explained his stand. But General Kalkar, I want to talk to you of one thing that politically, the ramifications of what happens, for instance, what happened with IPKF. The army was sent in. It was a political decision. As you explained earlier, it was not even a well thought out decision. It was a decision to distract rather than anything else. Midway the rules changed, the goalposts changed, the support also changed. We've heard that, we know that you were left literally on your own and the mission kept evolving and changing. There were no clear directions. The government changed then at the center also. But there was no, the political feedback for IPKF. Did you feel abandoned? There was no one to welcome the returning force on the shores of Chennai when you landed. Was there a feeling of abandonment, and has the current government done something to make up for it?
Well, what happened was that part of my charter or task was to bring peace and conditions for election in the north and the east, and once the elections are held, to the provinces would be amalgamated by an amendment to the Sri Lankan constitution, which is labelled as was then meant to be the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. My soldiers did that task, and we brought peace and tranquility in the north and the east, enabled, as a matter of fact, almost conducted the elections, merged the two provinces, and ipso facto, for 3 years, I administered the north and eastern province, that is 1/3 of Sri Lanka.
Okay.
We had a government there. The government was a government of Tamils. Mr. Varadaraj Perumal belonged to a Tamil party, EPRLF. He was the chief minister. The headquarters or the capital was Trincomalee. As a matter of fact, when I achieved that, I sent a message back. The mission accomplished, await further orders. And the message I got back was, continue to nourish and support the new government of Northeastern Province.
This is from Rajiv Gandhi?
Yes.
Okay.
So, I sent a message back saying I am not an agriculturist to nourish, to water the people, but nevertheless, I carried on. At that stage, the government in Sri Lanka changed.
All right.
And President Premadasa became the president. I used to go and meet him every fortnight or frequently, because I had to, since he was the supreme commander of all forces in Sri Lanka, and technically we were in Sri Lanka.
Right.
Of course, whenever I went, I used to have a political advisor. My political advisor then was the first secretary of the Indian High Commission Sri Lanka. That was Mr. Jaishankar, who is now our foreign minister. Incidentally, we had some of the brightest and the best in Colombo at that time. Mr. M.N. Dixit was the High Commissioner, who later on became the National Security Advisor. And Mr. Hardeep Puri was the Commercial Councillor, who is currently the Minister for Civil Aviation.
Now he's become the Cabinet Minister for Petroleum and Urban Ministry.
Right. So they were some of our finest diplomats India has ever had. And with that situation, I got a lot of help. But it came to a head when Premadasa said, I am going to revoke the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord.
All right.
And order the IPKF out of Sri Lanka. I got a call from Sri Lanka, from the president's house is on the office is calling. Will you take the call? So I took the call. They said the president is sending you a message by a messenger. He's be flying to you. And will you be there to receive it? I said, I will be at the airport to receive it. By this time, the Indian High Commissioner had changed in Sri Lanka. Mr. Dixit had been transferred to Pakistan, and we had a new High Commissioner. He called me, and he had got a whiff, and he in fact was in the know of what was coming in that letter. And that letter was stating, he told me, that it starts by a lot of officialese of hereby, thereby, and whereby. And then the president is basically going to be ordering you to vacate Sri Lanka within 24 hours.
All right.
IPKF will leave within 24 hours. Of course, I had a force of 80,000 people. They can't disappear in 24 hours. But nevertheless, the implication was clear. So I went to the airport, and the aircraft, special aircraft of the Sri Lankan Air Force, flew in, and out stepped the chief of the Sri Lankan Army, Hamilton Wanasinghe, who was a good friend because we've been dealing with him in our operations there. And he said, can we take a walk on the tarmac of the airfield itself? I said, sure. So he took me aside and said, look, I don't know what to do. The president has asked me, I'm carrying his letter, he's asked me to order you out of Sri Lanka. And if you don't obey the order, to attack you. So what should I do? I said, if I were you, I used to call him Vani, Vanasinghe. Vani, if I were you and my president ordered something, I would obey his orders. So he said, what will you do? I told him, I will do what I have to do. I will defend my soldiers, my weapons, and the area which is under my control.
So you will obey your orders.
Absolutely. And after that, he went back. But apprehending that something may be in the offing, I ordered one of my battle groups. That is, battle group is a group which consists of tanks and armored personnel carriers and infantry. I ordered one of the battle groups to line up on the entry to the eastern province, Trincomalee, or the eastern province, from the rest of Sri Lanka, not to let anyone into our territory. Well, the Sri Lankans had also lined up, but they had only armored cars, etc. And a T-72 tank is a frightening sight. And I think it must have given them the jitters. But I was ready to go to war. And then, but meanwhile, what happened was that Mark Tully, who was the BBC correspondent in Colombo, had got a whiff of this. He chartered a private plane. So when I reached back to my office, headquarters in Trincomalee, Mark Tully was there already.
Okay.
Waiting to see what happens. So I said, okay, then let me send a message back. So within his hearing, I called my chief of staff, Major General there, and I said, take down my orders. And within the hearing of Mark Tully. And I said, we've been threatened by Sri Lankan President of Sri Lanka. And I have conveyed that if any military action is taken by them, it can have unpredictable consequences, because I will respond, and I will respond to the point of origin of the attack.
Wow.
And then in my orders, I dictated that 54 division, which was the division in Jaffna in the north, we get ready to advance. First objective is there's a place in the center near past Vavonia. It is on the very close to Colombo, where the elephant tooth is kept. So, and second objective later, that obviously meant Colombo after that. And similarly, I gave similar orders to the Trincomalee forces also. And we used to have a liaison officer of the Sri Lankan army with us. So we used to have a liaison officer of the Sri Lankan army with us. That is protocol. So he was listening to all this. So he quietly ran out and went on a telephone and called Colombo, which we got to know, that this is what is happening, this is what I am up to. So the moment they got that message, I think Mr. Premadasa simmered down that I meant business.
Okay.
And thereafter it was all over. Subsequently, the government in India changed. Mr. V.P. Singh came to power as the Prime Minister, and Mr. Deshmukh, who was the advisor to the Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi, then later on to Mr. V.P. Singh, was sent to Colombo. I was also called there. He had a meeting with the President. We settled that we'll be withdrawing. So I said that, okay, we will withdraw, but my force is very large. And I will not have a replay of Afghanistan or Vietnam when the Americans were withdrawing or the Russians were withdrawing. So I will withdraw in phases and on my own terms. I was able to enforce that till the last.
You were the last man to leave.
I was the last man to leave. But as a standby arrangement, I had our aircraft carrier anchored off with aircraft ready, that should they welch on their agreement, the air will come in to support and I will revert back and stay there.
Okay, never ask a general to leave except on his own terms.
Yes.
But thank you so much for this conversation. And well, I think there's a lesson here which, those people who want the army to go in should actually listen to someone who's been there, who's been on the ground before saying things like this, weigh all the positions, weigh all the consequences, and then take such decisions. But that's it from now. Thank you so much for this conversation, and we'll see you again same time next week.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.